Hey, welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Cordles, parent of three in three different life stages. One is launched, one is in college, and one is in high school. Oh, pretty soon I'm going to have to change that intro in
Yeah.
like 8 weeks.
Yes.
So, anyway, here we are, season 5, and we are still talking about developmental milestones this week, specifically on parenting toddlers.
Yes, we're going to look at the research and reality around toddlers and parenting them, what that takes. And we're going to talk a little bit about their milestones or the things that we can typically expect kids to be able to do by a certain age. But we always want to give the disclaimer that we know kids develop at their own rate. And so some kids are early, some kids are kind of right on time, and some kids happen a little later. I've had some of each. My kids were not all one or the other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've got a mix. And so we just want to let you know that our role today is we're going to be sharing some of that generic information about parenting toddlers, but that you are the expert on your kids. And so we're going to provide the research based information, and you can use that information to make your own decisions.
Yes, and please do recognize that there are other factors that impact our children's rate of growth and development. One of those being temperament. We talked all about it in season 3, and you can go back and listen to those episodes and find out how temperament plays into the activities, milestones, and characteristics that our children exhibit, right? Additionally, we have environment that impacts our children's growth and development, the adults in their lives, the genetics that they came with. So many different things impact. So, we do want you to know that if you have concerns about your child's development, we recommend that you talk with your child's healthcare provider or a local area education agency.
Yes, lots of great resources to tap into. We're going to share information, but there's all kinds of great support on this.
There is. So let's first kick off today by defining this age of toddlers. So we're using the CDC, Center for Disease Control website, and their definition for a toddler is a child between the ages of 1 year to 3 years. So that 12 to 36 months age.
Yes. And again, we talked about this last time. There is some debate across fields whether these stages of toddler versus infant versus preschooler or early childhood, are they defined by age, right? Or are they defined by like a milestone or developmental marker? In this case, I told you I'd leave you in suspense last week.
Yes.
Some would argue that toddler starts when kids start walking. Like Lori actually mentioned that, like, oh, I just think of them different. But we know infants' skills, like their other skills besides walking, can still be more infant than toddler. So it's a whole thing. But there is some debate. And I specifically remember one thing that really fascinated me about learning about toddlers in a developmental psychology course that I took was that as parents, once our kids start to walk, we change our expectations, right? We suddenly are more ready to hold them accountable. So when they're digging into something they're not supposed to, once they start walking, we're like, whoa, hey, you're in charge of your body now. Stop. Don't do that. Right. And all of a sudden, this idea of like punishment and discipline and good behavior and bad behavior, it's a very different conversation than before they were walking when we definitely considered them infants. So that's just like an interesting thing about infants versus toddlers. Once they walk, we think of them differently.
We do. Even if we're not trying to, it just happens.
It does.
Yes. So, okay. So is that kind of how you think of toddlerhood then?
Okay. Honestly, the words that come to mind when you're like, oh, parenting toddlers, I'm like tantrums and choices. Tantrums. And I feel like when I say it, it sounds like a negative term, like, but tantrums are just a reality of having toddlers. And we're going to talk about how that fits into their emotional development and their cognitive development and social, whatever.
Yes.
But I think of tantrums with toddlers. And then I think as a parent, that's the word, having a toddler right now, right? Myself, that when things are hard, when we're in the middle of a challenging moment, I'm like, okay, choices. That's almost like my little word I cling to. Like, okay, what can you can choose this cup or that cup. You can choose
Mhm.
whether you're going to get down or whether I'm going to help you down, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I think of. What do you think of when you think of toddlers?
I I adore talking about toddlers because of their brains. And you know me, I
Mm,
love brain development, I love temperament. And to me, toddlerhood is about literally the brain changing every day. Every day
mm,
there's a new piece of the brain that has a connection. And so I remember talking to parents and them saying, "Who is this child that just woke up this morning? I do not know this child. Where did my sweet angel go?" And I'm like, "Isn't it wonderful? Their brain grew overnight." And
so
they
wonderful.
look at me with this blank stare like, "Lady." And that's, to me, that's like toddlerhood is science class 24/7, right? It's what
Oh,
is going on? What, how, why does this do this? How can I make this happen? This is mine. I want to do it. Yeah. All those
oh,
things.
so
Toddlers.
good. Yes,
Mm.
toddlers science class. That's so you're right. So
Yes.
good.
Well,
So
okay,
good.
so let's look at the different changes that happen in toddlerhood. I love what you said last week about categories. So we're going
Mm,
to look at these different categories, or domains is kind of the researchy term, that we think of when children move through the ages. These commonly experienced milestones that we refer to. All right.
yes, so these developmental domains. And again, like we did last week and we'll do in the coming episodes, we're going to talk very broad terms of
Mhm.
development. We're not going to talk your child should say this many words by this age, or we're not talking about any of that. But the great news is, if you came here looking for that, we've got a great resource for you. The CDC has an app called Milestones. And yeah, talked about it last time. I won't go on and on, but it can help you kind of recognize if you have concerns about your toddler. Look for red flags, look for, maybe my child is just kind of a little bit later in their development. It'll help you decipher some of those super specific things. So a great resource if you're looking for some of those more specific things you're wondering if your child should be able to do.
Exactly. All right. So the first domain or category that we're going to look at is physical. And like you mentioned, Mackenzie, it seems like as soon as our child starts walking, we begin to think of them differently.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, when we look at movement or motor development, this brings children into different situations, right? Because now
Yeah.
they can move over to that really interesting plant with the dirt, right? They can run away from you when they couldn't before. They
Hmm.
can climb and jump and get places where you just maybe weren't quite prepared for all of that movement at such an early age, right? So that's one category.
Yes. And that ties right in with some of the cognitive things that are happening. So they have these new physical skills. And we talked about with older infants last week how Piaget is kind of the theorist that where a lot of this comes from, but this idea of being more coordinated to manipulate the world, right? Our older
Mhm.
infants are like, I can reach for that and this thing will happen. Or if I drop this might happen. Also a good science experiment, right? If I drop
If
this.
I drop this,
So live that
what
life with my
what is
toddler.
the law of gravity?
Yes. But it also, as they move further, as they get a little older and toddlers, we know that they can use their body to now solve new problems.
Mhm.
And so I even think of like something on the table that my toddler can't reach. It's like, oh, they're reaching for it. And
Uh-huh.
you know what? If I pull on the table runner,
Uh-huh.
that object comes right along with it, right? And so they're really learning not only that they can impact the world, but also I can use my body to
Mhm.
achieve the goals that I want. So they do more problem solving with their bodies, and all that stuff with the cognitive abilities. And another thing that's interesting is their memory and their attention span both increase, right? As infants, we a lot of times say, like, when I was a new parent, it's a good thing they don't remember because their memory is low because I didn't know what I was doing. But as toddlers, and again, they're not going to remember any, nothing too crazy, but their memory does start to increase a little bit,
Mhm.
which is why they can start to retain words and things. And then also their attention span gets a little longer, but I mean, we're not talking like 20 minutes circle time or 10-minute book but we're
Yes.
getting a little more attention than just, oh, look at this object and turn away like we had when they were infants.
Exactly, exactly. So then a third category or domain is language. And it's at this toddler stage where they're really beginning to figure out that there are symbols that represent things that they know. So I remember my middle child on our way to daycare, we would always turn left at these big golden arches or this big yellow M. And she actually would kind of start to cry as soon as she saw that
Oh,
because she knew that that meant we were soon getting out of the car and she was going into daycare. And so
oh,
their language development happens in many different phases and in a very predictable yet fascinating way at this age. I love the idea of the language explosion that
mm,
happens about 18 months. And they've had maybe one word for specific things. And now all of a sudden they can turn that word into like a 2 word phrase, blue
yes.
cup or my cup. Probably more like mine and yours, right? And mine and mine.
Yes.
But they're really working hard at these things. And you have an 18-month-old, don't you?
Yeah. So mine, he's just a little older than 1.5. And he's kind of, I don't want to say my late bloomer, but my daughter was very early in a lot of her milestones, due in part to her temperament.
Mhm.
And yeah, my son's a little more easygoing and hasn't been in a huge hurry for a lot of the milestones. And so he's kind of like just hitting this language explosion. Actually, my co-parent and I like had a few days away. And when we came back, I could not believe how much more he was saying. Like in a
Mhm.
matter of a few days, it went from like he could say before we left, like, thank you, mama, thank you, dada. And now he can say like thank you, other people. And
Uh-huh.
he went from like he would say like "suh" for my daughter, and her name does not start with S. But that was like the noise he would make. And now it sounds like he's starting to say her name. And
Aw.
so it just explodes. And it's like, okay, I didn't know you knew this word. Okay, I've never heard you say that before. Like, whoa, so much language happening.
I love it.
Mm.
Yes.
It's a huge part of what they're doing every day, right? Like, "Oh, I could do this, I can think
Oh,
that, I can try to say that.
absolutely.
You
Yes.
say that word, I'm gonna try to repeat it."
Mhm. Oops, I
Yes.
didn't mean to say that word. And you repeated it. Yeah.
My bad. Which also goes right into this social domain. And so one thing I love about toddlers is when they start to develop, because they're starting to understand that they can affect the world and
Mhm.
understand other people, like have are doing different things than I am. They start to feel some of the like self-conscious emotions like shame or guilt or embarrassment.
Hmm.
Like the toddler who will go like stand behind the chair to poop, right?
Yes.
Or my son will do like if he's just like, "Oh, buddy, no, like that's not a good choice." Even just like a minor scolding of like, "Okay, well, you're really not supposed to do that." We'll get the hands over the face and laying his face down on the couch, right? And so they start to
Yes.
feel some of those self-conscious emotions because they realize like my mom didn't like when I did that, right? And so I
Mhm.
realized my emotions impact things.
Mm.
They
Yes.
also, like we said, they imitate behavior, they can copy things. Baby signs can still be a thing. It can be toddler signs to communicate.
Absolutely.
Yep. And then
Yes.
that huge realization that like what I do can impact other people. If I cry when we're in the grocery store, do my parents give me the thing I'm crying for?
Mhm.
Do they walk out without do we walk out without our groceries? Like, right, but I'm starting to realize if I do this, they might do that. If
Mhm.
I drop my cup, what happens? If I pull the dog's tail, what happens? And so they're doing a ton of experimenting, right? You said science
Mhm.
experiment. They're doing a ton of experimenting with the world around them.
They are. And that social then moves right into emotional as well. Like you were talking about the emotions. And so if we look at emotional development as its own domain, we have to remember that even though they can walk, even though they can run, even though they're starting to talk, even though they can um, have this shame or embarrassment, they don't have a good grasp on handling those emotions, self regulating,
Mm,
keeping those emotions in check. And we sometimes expect them to. Like, okay, you
yeah.
can walk, you should be able to not reach for the dirty, the dirty plants, right? You should be able to not do that. And really, when we're looking at toddlers from the ages of 1 to 3, part of their emotional development is all about that idea of self-regulation.
Hmm.
Um, and they can be so easily frustrated because they know more than they can say, right? They do have these physical opportunities, but they maybe aren't allowed to use them all the time. So I can
Yes.
run and I can run, but you keep holding me back. You're holding my hand and telling me no. My emotional development is not ready for you to keep saying no.
Yes.
And so, gosh, I think that being a toddler has got to be so frustrating at times because you have all of these newfound skills that you're working on, yet emotionally, you are a mess and you cannot control them, right?
And
Oh,
as adults, we've had all this experience, and whether like good or bad, around what happens, like appropriate ways to express emotions. Toddlers
yes.
have almost none. And so
Yes.
it's like, I'm mad, I'm going to knock over your block tower. I'm mad, I'm gonna pull the dog's tail, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
gonna do these things. And I'm learning. You said a thing before about that toddlers were learning to set up the backyard fence,
Hmm.
right? That toddlers are pushing where is appropriate and what is allowed.
Hmm.
And as parents, we're working on setting the boundaries of like, this is behavior we like seeing. This is behavior that's not safe. This is behavior
Hmm.
that hurts people, right? And so we're working on the boundaries to keep our kids safe while still letting them, quote unquote, explore and play in the backyard.
Right.
Yeah,
And
because they don't have a lot of those skills or knowledge.
they don't. And they're in science class 24/7. So,
Yes. I need
right?
to see what happens when I do this, and I
Yeah.
don't have the impulse control not to.
No. I know we talked about it being like having the 90% off clearance rack follow you around
Yes.
all day. Like, I need
Yeah.
this. I need this.
I
90%
want
off?
that.
Are
I
you
want
kidding
that.
me? I want this. I need that. Yeah. All right. What about
Absolutely.
guiding toddlers?
Yes. So we are the Science of Parenting podcast. And so it's great to understand a little bit of the development, what's going on with our kids, what can they realistically do, and what they can't do quite yet. But ultimately, it comes down to like, all right, so what do I do about all that? Right? What practical strategies do you have for us? And so we were able to collaborate with IAC professor Dr. Diana Lang, and she gave us access to her open access book called Parenting in Diverse Contexts. And she has these really great little one liners. It's like, okay, you want one sentence about parenting an infant, toddler, teenager? Here it is. And so this is what she has to say about toddlers. As parents, we use limitations, protection, and structure to create safe spaces for play and exploration. Limitations, protection, and structure to create safe spaces for play and exploration.
I love that.
And I'm
Love
kind
it.
of amazed. Like, I feel like I should have talked about exploring more. That's a very toddler thing, is like
Oh, yeah.
exploring the world and like, yeah, exploration for sure. We want them to be able to play and
Mhm.
explore. And we provide the limits, protection, and structure
We
so they can do
do.
that.
And I love that her one-liners, they go right along with Ellen Galinsky's stages of parenting. So,
Yes.
in this stage of parenting, we are really focused on developing those rules and boundaries while our kids explore, right?
Hmm.
We are working on making sure that we are the authority as parents while our kids explore this cool world around them.
Yes.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of like someone I know will say like it's like a saying about like if it's hard when they're toddlers, wait till they're teenagers. Which neither good, like neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But the idea that we're setting boundaries and rules that we can maintain and
Mhm.
adapt and morph over time, but that our kids come to know us as people who will be consistent and keep them
Mhm.
safe and set appropriate boundaries and all these things that like that's what we're really setting in toddlerhood. So yeah, if we have no boundaries or any of those things, that will affect our kids as teenagers. That why you
Mhm.
suddenly have all these rules.
Yes. Wait a second.
Yes. And so I do
Oh.
love that. I love that, like, okay, limits, structures. I can
Yeah,
do that.
I can
I
do
can do
that.
that. I'm gonna let
Well,
them explore, but
okay, so if you had to tell other parents then about developing boundaries and limitations, like what advice would you give?
ooh. Okay, so I actually think I got this from one of our just-in-time parenting newsletters. Like when I received it as a parent myself, the phrase "Don't ask a toddler." So it's kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie, if you
Uh-huh.
ask a toddler like a question that allows them to say no, they're probably gonna. So
Are you
like,
ready
don't.
to leave the park?
Yes, right. Are like, can we get our shoes on? No.
No.
Right? And especially as they get used to, like, I can now tell you the word no, right?
Mhm.
That's a new skill I'm wanting to practice. Or like, I want things for myself and I can
Mhm.
communicate that to you. I want to say no, right? And so that's mine is like, don't ask a toddler. And
Mhm.
so the alternative, like I said earlier, is like choices. So I actually, my like proud parenting moment at one point, I was with a friend who has a child around the same age as my older child. And they were both toddlers at the time. And I was telling her, I'm like, "Oh, I swear, all I do all day is try to think of how I can turn something into a choice."
Oh.
And then my daughter climbed up the end table, and my friend looked at me like, "What are you gonna say? What's a choice about this?" I mean, in like a fun way. And
Mhm.
I was like, "You can get down, or I can help you."
Mhm.
Right? And so finding ways to turn into like, "Oh, like, can we get down, please?" Like, "No, I'm not gonna ask you because the answer that I'm not okay with the choice no." Like,
Right.
what about you? What would be your advice for setting boundaries and limits with toddlers?
Okay, so I think advice for parents developing limitations and boundaries around toddlers, I know mine would be that their no, don't take it personally. Like,
Oh.
sometimes they're just saying the word no because it's a word that they know. Like
Mhm.
KNOW, they know that word no. And they're test driving the word no. They're test driving the limits and the boundaries. And so sometimes parents say, well, he told me no, and then he threw a tantrum because I didn't give it to him because he didn't want it. Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that the welcome to toddlerhood, the era of I have no idea what you want. And
Yes.
so I think
But
it's
I know you do. You know
I
what you want,
yeah,
but I don't know what you want.
I don't know what you want. And so just that idea of, don't take everything in toddlerhood as definitive. So the no
Mm,
might not always mean no. Like it might only mean no for a split second until I realize that I don't get fries because I said no, but I actually really did want fries. I thought you were talking about the milk, right? And so,
yes.
yeah, that would be my advice is that they're going to change their mind. Like they just are.
Mhm. We
Yep.
are in full-blown no phase at our house.
Yeah.
And even, like, my son likes to go get his own coat for, like, from where it hangs, like, by the front
Mhm.
door, and so be like, "Alright, buddy, get your coat." And, "No," and then I'll run and
No.
get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, "Okay, alright,
All
okay."
right, gotcha.
You wanna show me that you have a choice. Alright, buddy, I
Mhm.
get it.
Yes. And like we
Oh,
can't get hung up on that because think about
yeah.
how your day would start out then if you got hung up on the fact that well you said no. You must have meant no,
Mm.
so no actually he's just really practicing his words and he's excited to go get his coat. Yeah.
Yes, right?
Look
And
what
yeah,
I can
and that
do.
and providing those choices. Yeah, I said like don't ask a toddler. The alternative is to provide the choice and choices that we're okay with them doing,
Mhm.
right? Like, would you like to get your coat or would you like me to? Okay.
Mhm.
If he says like you get it, like
All
I
right.
wouldn't say exactly that, but like then I need to get it, right? That's a
Mhm.
choice that I offered. So make sure whatever choices you offer or you're okay with doing.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, well, that kind of brings us to the reality of some parenting tips. And the CDC has some great lists for all different ages. We're going to keep sharing them along each episode. And so, this week's list, I think I'm just going to pick out maybe a theme, and then you can pick
Mm,
out the ones that you noticed on the list. And
that
so,
sounds good.
I again noticed the idea that there were several strategies, several ideas and tips around the idea of Dr. Beecher's talk, read, sing concept.
Yes, we say that with infants, right? And like it
Hmm.
is totally like there's tips about finding a special place and time to read with your kids, about
Hmm.
how we talk with them, and even it kind of hints at, if you've heard of the idea of serve and return
Mhm.
conversations, which basically is like, if your child does something, or even if they're not saying something, maybe they're pointing, maybe they're smiling, maybe there's something, somehow communicating, and then we say something back like, it looks like you want blank, or
Mhm.
this is funny for you, or whatever it is. And it's about the conversation, that you volley the conversation back and forth with our toddlers.
Yes.
And we didn't talk about that with infants. It's really great with infants too. But yeah, that talk, read, sing, for sure. There's all kinds of tips in there about how to do those. But that's a huge part of what it talks about, is those 3.
It is, absolutely. And other strategies, and I see another theme as I look through the strategies of what we talked about was giving that opportunity to try. Like
Mm,
giving them the opportunity to try and do it themselves. Even if we know they might not be able to finish the task, thinking about like zipping a coat, giving them the opportunity, you start the zipper and they finish it. Or
mm,
they put their shoe on and you tie it. So the opportunities to try bits and pieces and parts and pieces of the things that they're doing.
totally. That exploration and independence. There's tons of
Mhm.
tips with all that kind of stuff in it. And then one of the ones that stood out to me, I actually want to read it word for word because I thought it was great, is giving our child attention and praise when they follow instructions and
Mm.
they show positive behavior.
Mhm.
And limiting, I'm going to use the word overreacting for behavior we don't like, or defiant behavior. So if we don't love a tantrum, right, we don't want to overreact and give them too
Mhm.
much attention. Then they're like, oh, this works great. I get the attention I want. Um,
Exactly.
so giving positive attention for behavior we like, limiting our overreacting for behavior we don't. But then the second part is to teach our kids acceptable behavior, right? Teach them
Yes.
acceptable ways to show things like upset, like, and even teaching them those language emotion words like,
Mhm.
"Oh, you're mad," or "You didn't want that to happen," or "You're frustrated," or "You thought you were gonna get to do this. That's disappointing."
Yes.
Ah, yes.
We had an episode in season 1 where we
Mhm.
talked about the strategy house rules. And that was
Yes.
a strategy that I learned from 0 to 3 and from Dr. Ron Lally. And it's exactly that, where you teach them the behaviors you want and you limit the overreaction of behaviors you don't want, so that honestly you're giving them more attention for those behaviors you do want. And
Yes.
I love that. It's one of my favorite strategies that we
I
shared.
think so. In that episode, if you guys have been listening to us for a while, you might remember Lori assigned that activity to me to do, and now I'm like, man, I maybe need to assign it to me to do it again. It's been a while. I might have to let go of no,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Yes.
but figuring out definitely what behaviors we want to provide attention for and limit our overreaction. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Well,
So
okay. So does that bring us to the
it
resource?
certainly does. And
All right.
we're actually talking about the same resource we talked about for infants, this just in time parenting newsletters. They come to our email and they're totally free based on the age of your kids. And actually have a story specifically about toddlers and these newsletters. So when my daughter was about 2, actually probably exactly 2, because if I was getting a newsletter, it was probably related to her second birthday because it comes right based on their age. Comes in my inbox. And like I said, she was kind of early on a lot of her milestones. So we would read through it and I'm like, oh, good. She's doing this. She's doing this. That's great. Okay. Yeah, we're doing well here. And sometimes even maybe I'd puff my chest up a little like, "Oh, we're doing so well." And then I had a child who was a little bit later on things. It's like, okay, yep, every kid's different. But I remember reading through the list of like things your child might be able to do. And it was like, get themselves dressed. And I was like, I've never let her try. Every morning, we get up, I get her dressed, we get out the door, and I was like, I've never even let her try that. And
Uh-huh.
so even as someone with,
Yeah.
like, a background in child development, as a parent, I love these newsletters. They gave me great tips about how to support my kids' development, good reminders about
Yes.
things they, can be working on. And so, yeah, jitp.info. So just in time parenting is what that is. Free newsletters based on your kids' age. You can sign up for more than one kid. It's just such good stuff. Research based parenting information.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
So then we are ready to have our stop, breathe, talk moment. I mean, last week Kenzie came in and kind of blew us away and reminded us we didn't even talk about baby signs and sign language. So I'm a little on edge to find out what she's going to share. But this is our moment where we talk with our producer. We talk about, we use our flagship strategy of stop, breathe, talk as a way for us to take a pause in our episode and take a breath and maybe look at things from a different perspective and specifically about toddlers. So, welcome, Kenzie.
Thanks. So, here's the thing. Every little bit of every question I thought of, I was like, oh no, they're already talking about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think my question is around something you mentioned briefly, but I want to go into a little bit more because I know that this is a big interest area of Mackenzie's. And that is literacy.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and I thought of this because I was thinking about language development. And often we have adults who think, oh, they'll learn how to read in preschool. They'll learn how to read in kindergarten. But reading starts before that, right? So can you maybe talk a little bit about how we can engage in literacy with our toddlers?
Yes,
That's
yes,
all
I can.
you.
I love this. We have a program we offer at Iowa State that I get to work alongside a lot, and but how we can promote these skills with our young kids. And so, one is having regular experiences with books for our kids, finding a special time that makes sense for you, right? Like right before bedtime, right before a meal, right after a meal, right when they wake up. But finding a regular time to have experiences with kids and books. Another one that like singing is something that actually promotes their language and their literacy skills. There's a ton of good stuff there. And then one that Dr. Beecher, who is our literacy state specialist, reminds me about is giving our toddlers access to drawing materials like big crayons. Even if they're doing the like whole fist huge crayon, that scribbling they do is actually a precursor to them learning to write. And then one of my favorite things to tell parents of toddlers when it comes to books is like, you don't even have to read the words. Like books are a tool. Really, the way I think of them is like books are a tool to really engage us in conversation with our kids. It provides us words we can say if we do choose to read along, but there's even some really great books that don't have a lot of words, and you can flip a page and you're like, oh wow, and you're narrating what you see, and you ask your child like, oh, how is he feeling, or what's happening here? And there's so many. I love books as a tool to just really think about like promoting conversation. Like, maybe you have a kid's book that has way too many words for a toddler, but there's some animals they might recognize or certain people, right? My toddler will look at a book and say, mama. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm not in that book, but for sure, that is an adult woman.
Yes.
Maybe somebody's mama.
Yeah, somebody's mama. And so,
I love that.
I'll say, but it's not like I get to do a lot with our literacy education at work, but it's not like you don't have any experience with literacy, Lori, especially with toddlers.
I just love being able to watch the light bulb moment in parents when they realize they don't have to read the whole book. And to help parents understand that just touching and opening and closing the book 15 times is literacy interaction.
Yes, and especially for a toddler.
Absolutely. And so we get to give parents permission to not read the whole book, to not even read the words in the book. We just maybe look at the pictures. We maybe hold the book upside down and then we turn it the right way and then we turn it the wrong way and then we turn it upside down. And that's the time that we had with that book. And I love being able to give parents permission because that helps them maybe feel more comfortable. Maybe they didn't enjoy reading as a child, and to be able to say to them, you know what? You don't have to read the words in the book. Like you can sit with the book and just touch the book and talk about the pictures, and that's reading. It takes the pressure of, gosh, I wasn't a very good reader. I don't like to read. It takes that pressure away and then creates a new opportunity for them to enjoy learning to read with their child.
Totally. And I think going with the idea of like, what's fun?
Yes.
Like, this is one, like, maybe the only one time when it comes to parenting that you're not the bad guy. Like, your job as a parent, especially when they're toddler, preschool, infant, is to have fun with books. And so if you're a toddler, there's actually this really sweet video in one of the things that we offer of this toddler or like older infant, young toddler looking at the book, and the parent is trying to flip through the pages and the toddler keeps pulling the book back to the front cover, and she is just like fascinated by this elephant on the front cover, and the parent tries to turn the page and she wants to look at that elephant, and eventually, after one or two times, the parent's like, you see this elephant here? It is huge. Elephants make this noise. Look, he's surrounded by birds or trees or, and the parent just has a conversation, and then the child crawls out of their lap. And it's like, that was a book interaction.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I love it.
All kinds of flexibility with toddlers and books.
Right. And I wanted to bring that up because like some people do have that idea that like reading starts when you can read the words, right? They're reading when they tell you what those words are, but that's not true. So yeah, just encouraging parents to find different ways to interact with books, and even as you said, that the back and forth, there's a fancy word for it, but the back and forth helps with literacy skills as well. And there's lots of ways to increase literacy skills, but
yes,
dive into that a little further.
Yeah. Those are a few off the cuff, right? I'm sure if I had been planning, I maybe could have said something more articulate or insightful, but that's great.
There's probably more on our website.
Oh, yes. Or check out one of our Iowa State Extension parenting like education programs for literacy.
Stuff. Maybe we can tap into Connie, Dr. Beecher, and do something around literacy sometime. We'll have to.
I would say, hold that thought, everybody. Hold that thought.
I hear a guest blog coming up. Well, thanks for joining us. Yes.
Thank you. So that's Mackenzie DeYoung, our podcast producer. She kind of listens along during the episode and then comes in and asks us something on the topic, but maybe something she wants to hear more about. And we just don't know what she's going to ask.
We don't.
And so we do off the cuff. It's like, hey, you know what? Toddlers and literacy. Here we go.
Yes.
So today we got to talk all about our toddlers, right? They're fun and they're full of feelings and they have some skills, but really not a lot of skills to navigate the world. So our job is to help set those limits and boundaries, help them develop, but stay safe while they can explore.
Remember, they've really only been around this earth 36 months at the most.
At a max.
At the most, 36 months.
Yes.
And so much happens in that time frame that, those emotions are big sometimes, and they need us to remember 36 months. That's it.
Yeah. Of all the domains for toddlers,
the domains.
Emotions are, right? There's lots of language, there's lots of stuff, but learning how to deal with those big feelings they have, that's tough.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. And remember to subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Watch the show on video each week and join us on Facebook or Twitter at The Science of Parent to see our content in your feed.
Yes, please do come along with us. Next week, we'll be looking at preschoolers and we'll continue on up the age groups. But please come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Lori Kothals and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.